Otto of the Silver Hand. Chapter 8. In the House of the Dragon Scorner. A tall, narrow, gloomy room, no furniture but a rude bench, a bare stone floor, cold stone walls, and a gloomy ceiling of arched stone overhead. A long, narrow slit of a window high above in the wall, through the iron bars of which Otto could see a small patch of blue sky, and now and then a darting swallow, for an instant seen, the next instant gone. Such was the little baron's prison in Trutz-Drachen. Fastened to a bolt and hanging against the wall hung a pair of heavy chains, with gaping fetters at the ends. They were thick with rust, and the red stain of the rust streaked the wall behind where they hung like a stream of blood. Little Otto shuddered as he looked at them. "Can those be meant for me?" he thought. Nothing was to be seen but that one patch of blue sky far up in the wall. No sound from without was to be heard in that gloomy cell of stone, for the window pierced the outer wall, and the earth and its noises lay far below. Suddenly a door crashed without, and the footsteps of men were heard coming along the corridor. They stopped in front of Otto's cell, and he heard the jingle of keys, and then a loud rattle of one thrust into the lock of a heavy oaken door. The rusty bolt was shot back with a screech, and the door opened, and there stood Baron Henry, no longer in his armor, but clad in a long black robe that reached nearly to his feet, and a broad leather belt was girdled about his waist, and from it dangled a short, heavy hunting sword. Another man was with the baron, a heavy-faced fellow clad in leathern jerkin, over which was drawn a short coat of linked mail. The two stood for a moment looking into the room, and Otto, his pale face glimmering in the gloom, sat upon the edge of the heavy wooden bench or bed, looking back at them out of his great blue eyes. Then the two entered, and closed the door behind them. "Dost thou know why thou art here?" said the baron in his deep, harsh voice. "Nay," said Otto, "I know not." "So," said the baron, "then I will tell thee. 3 years ago the good Baron Friedrich, my uncle, kneeled in the dust and besought mercy at thy father's hands. The mercy he received was the coward blow that slew him. Thou knowest the story." "Ay," said Otto, trembling, "I know it." "Then dost thou know why I am here?" said the baron. "Nay, dear Lord Baron, I know not," said the poor little Otto, and began to weep. The baron stood for a moment or two, looking gloomily upon him, as the little boy sat there with the tears running down his white face. "I will tell thee," said he at last. "I swore an oath that the red cock should crow on Drachenhausen, and I have given it to the flames. I swore an oath that no Welf that ever left my hands should be able to strike such a blow as thy father gave to Baron Friedrich. And now I will fulfill that too. Catch the boy, Caspar, and hold him." As the man in the mail shirt stepped toward little Otto, the boy leapt up from where he sat and caught the baron about the knees. "Oh, dear Lord Baron," he cried, "do not harm me. I am only a little child. I have never done harm to thee. Do not harm me." "Take him away," said the baron harshly. The fellow stooped and loosened Otto's hold, in spite of his struggles and cries, carried him to the bench against which he held him, whilst the baron stood above him. Baron Henry and the other came forth from the cell, carefully closing the wooden door behind them. At the end of the corridor the baron turned. "Let the leech be sent to the boy," he said, and then he turned and walked away. Otto lay upon the hard couch in his cell, covered with a shaggy bear skin. His face was paler and thinner than ever, and dark rings encircled his blue eyes. He was looking towards the door, for there was a noise of someone fumbling with the lock without. Since that dreadful day that Baron Henry had come to his cell, only 2 souls had visited Otto. One was the fellow who had come with the baron that time. His name, Otto found out, was Caspar. He brought the boy his rude meals of bread and meat and water. The other visitor was the leech, or doctor, a thin, Wesleyan little man, with a kindly wrinkled face and a gossipy tongue, who, besides binding wounds, bleeding and leeching, and administering his simple remedies to those who were taken sick in the castle, acted as the baron's barber. The baron had left the key in the lock of the door, so that these two might enter when they chose, but Otto knew that it was neither the one nor the other whom he now heard at the door, working uncertainly with the key, striving to turn it in the rusty, cumbersome lock. At last the bolts grated back. There was a pause, and then the door opened a little way, and Otto thought that he could see someone peeping in from without. By and by the door opened further. There was another pause, and then a slender, elfish-looking little girl with straight black hair and shining black eyes crept noiselessly into the room. She stood close by the door with her finger in her mouth, staring at the boy where he lay upon his couch, and Otto upon his part lay full of wonder, gazing back upon the little elfin creature. She, seeing that he made no sign or motion, stepped a little nearer, and then after a moment's pause, a little nearer still, until at last she stood within a few feet of where he lay. "Art thou the Baron Otto?" said she. "Yes," answered Otto. "Prut," she said, "and is that so? Why, I thought thou wert a great tall fellow at least, and here thou art a little boy no older than Karl Marx, the goose-herd." Then after a little pause, "My name is Pauline, and my father is the Baron. I heard him tell my mother all about thee, and so I wanted to come here and see thee myself. Art thou sick?" "Yes," said Otto, "I am sick." "And did my father hurt thee?" "Aye," said Otto. His eyes filled with tears, until one sparkling drop trickled slowly down his white face. Little Pauline stood looking seriously at him for a while. "I am sorry for thee, Otto," said she at last, and then, at her childish pity, he began crying in earnest. This was only the first visit of many from the little maid, for after that she often came to Otto's prison, who began to look for her coming from day to day as the one bright spot in the darkness and the gloom. Sitting upon the edge of his bed and gazing into her face with wide-open eyes, she would listen to him by the hour, as he told her of his life in the far-away monastery home, of poor simple Brother John's wonderful visions, of the good abbot's books with their beautiful pictures, and of all the monkish tales and stories of knights and dragons and heroes, emperors of ancient Rome, which Brother Emmanuel had taught him to read in the crabbed monkish Latin in which they were written. One day the little maid sat for a long while silent after he had ended speaking. At last she drew a deep breath. "And are all these things that thou tellest me about the priests in their castle really true?" said she. "Yes," said Otto, "all are true." "And do they never go out to fight other priests?" "No," said Otto, "they know nothing of fighting." "So?" said she, and then fell silent in the thought of the wonder of it all, and that there should be men in the world that knew nothing of violence and bloodshed. For in all the 8 years of her life she had scarcely been outside of the walls of Castle Trutstraken. At another time it was of Otto's mother that they were speaking. "And didst thou never see her, Otto?" said the little girl. "Aye," said Otto, "I see her sometimes in my dreams, and her face always shines so bright that I know she is with the angels. For Brother John has often seen the dear angels, and he tells me that their faces always shine in that way. I saw her the night thy father hurt me so, for I could not sleep, and my head felt as though it would break asunder. And then she came and leaned over me and kissed my forehead, and after that I fell asleep." "But where did she come from, Otto?" said the little girl. "From paradise, I think," said Otto, with that patient sereneness that he had caught from the monks, and that sat so quaintly upon him. "So," said little Pauline, and then after a pause, "that is why thy mother kissed thee when thy head ached, because she's an angel. When I was sick, my mother bade Gretchen carry me to a far part of the house, because I cried, and so troubled her. Did thy mother ever strike thee, Otto?" "Nay," said Otto. "Mine hath often struck me," said Pauline. One day little Pauline came bustling into Otto's cell, her head full of the news which she carried. "My father says thy father is out in the woods somewhere yonder, back of the castle. For Fritz, the swineherd, told my father that last night he had seen a fire in the woods, and that he had crept up to it without anyone knowing, and there he had seen the Baron Conrad and 6 of his men, and they were eating one of the swine that they had killed and roasted." "Maybe," said she, seating herself upon the edge of Otto's couch, "maybe my father will kill thy father, and they will bring him here and let him lie upon a black bed with bright candles burning round him, as they did my Uncle Friedrich when he was killed." "God forbid," said Otto, and then lay for a while with his hands clasped. "Dost thou love me, Pauline?" said he after a while. "Yes," said Pauline, "for thou art a good child, though my father says that thy wits are cracked." "Mayhaps they are," said Otto simply, "for I have often been told so before. But thou wouldst not see me die, Pauline, wouldst thou?" "Nay," said Pauline, "I would not see thee die, for then thou couldst tell me no more stories, for they told me that Uncle Friedrich could not speak because he was dead." "Then listen, Pauline," said Otto. "If I go not away from here, I shall surely die. Every day I grow more sick, and the leech cannot cure me." Here he broke down, and turning his face upon the couch, began crying, while little Pauline sat looking seriously at him. "Why dost thou cry, Otto?" she said after a while. "Because," said he, "I am so sick. I want my father to come and take me away from here." "But why dost thou want to go away?" said Pauline. "If thy father takes thee away, thou canst not tell me any more stories." "Yes, I can," said Otto, "for then I grow to be a man, I will come again and marry thee, and when thou art my wife, I can tell thee all the stories that I know. Dear Pauline, canst thou not tell my father where I am, that he may come here and take me away before I die?" "Mayhaps I could do so," said Pauline, after a while, "for sometimes I go with Caspar Max to see his mother, who nursed me when I was a baby. She's the wife of Fritz the swineherd, and she will make him tell thy father, for she will do whatever I ask her, and Fritz will do whatever she bids him to do." "And for my sake wilt thou tell him, Pauline?" said Otto. "But see, Otto," said the little girl, "if I tell him, wilt thou promise to come indeed and marry me when thou art grown a man?" "Yes," said Otto, very seriously, "I will promise." "Then I will tell thy father where thou art," said she. "But thou wilt do it without the Baron Henry knowing, wilt thou not, Pauline?" "Yes," she said, "for my father and my mother know that I did such a thing. They would strike me, perhaps, maybe send me to bed alone in the dark." Chapter 9. How One-Eyed Hans Came to Trutstrachen. Fritz the swineherd sat eating his late supper of pottage out of great, coarse, wooden bowl, and Catherine sat at the other end of the table, and the little child played upon the earthen floor. A shaggy dog lay curled up in front of the fire, and a grunting pig scratched against a leg of the rude table close beside where the woman sat. Yes, yes, said Catherine, speaking of the matter of which they had already been talking. It is all very true that the Drachenhausens are a bad lot, and for one am I of no mind to say no to that. All the same, it is a sad thing that a simple-witted little child like the young Baron should be so treated as the boy has been. And now that our Lord Baron has served him, so that he, at least, will never be able to do us harm, I for one say that he should not be left there to die alone in the bleak cell. Fritz the swineherd gave a grunt at this without raising his eyes from the bowl. Yes, good, said Catherine. I know what thou meanest, Fritz, that it is none of my business to be thrusting my finger into the Baron's dish, but to hear the way that child spoke when she was here this morn, it would have moved a heart of stone to hear her tell of all his pretty talk. Thou would try to let the red beard know that that poor boy, his son, is sick to death in that bleak cell. Wilt thou not, Fritz? The swineherd dropped his wooden spoon into the bowl with a clatter. Potstersand, he said, art thou gone out of thy head to let thy wits run upon such things as this of which thou talkest to me? If it should come to our Lord Baron's ears, he would cut the tongue from out my head, and my head from my shoulders for sure. Dost thou think I am going to meddle in such a matter as this? Listen, these proud baron folk, with their masterful ways, drive out short hither and thither. They beat us, they drive us, and they kill us as they choose. Our lives are not as much to them as one of these swine. Why should I trouble my head if they choose to lop and trim one another? The fewer there are of them, the better it is for us, I say. We poor folk have a hard enough life of it without thrusting our heads into the noose to help them out of their troubles. What thinkest thou would happen to us if Baron Henry should hear of us betraying his affairs to the red-headed man? Nay, said Catherine, thou hast naught to do in this matter but to tell the red beard in what part of the castle the little baron lives. And what good would that do? Said Fritz the swineherd. I know not, said Catherine, but I have promised the little one that thou wouldst find the Baron Conrad and tell him this. Thou hast promised a mere egg, said her husband angrily. How shall I find the Baron Conrad to bear a message to him when our Baron has been looking for him in vain for 2 days past? Thou hast found him once, and thou mayest find him again, said Catherine, for it is not likely that he will keep far away from here whilst his boy is in such sore need of help. I will have nothing to do with it, said Fritz, and he got up from the wooden block whereon he was sitting and stomped out of the house. But then Catherine had heard him talk in that way before, and knew in spite of his saying no, that sooner or later he would do as she wished. 2 days later, a very stout little one-eyed man, clad in a leathern jerkin and wearing a round leathern cap upon his head, came toiling up the path to the postern door of Trutz-Drachen, his back bowed under the burthen of a great peddler's pack. He was our old friend, the one-eyed Hans, though even his brother would hardly have known him in his present guise, for beside having turned peddler, he had grown of a sudden surprisingly fat. Rap-tat-tat, he knocked at the door with a knotted end of the crooked, thorned staff upon which he leaned. He waited for a while, and then knocked again, rap-tap-tap. Presently, with a click, a little square wicket that pierced the door was opened, and a woman's face peered out through the iron bars. The one-eyed Hans whipped off his leathern cap. "Good day, pretty one," said he, "and hast thou any need of glass beads, ribbons, combs, or trinkets? Here I am come all the way from Grunstadt, with a pack full of such happy things as thou never laid eyes on before. Here be rings and bracelets, necklaces, that might be of pure silver, and set with diamonds and rubies, for anything that thy dear one could tell if he saw them decked in them. And all are so cheap that thou hast only to say, 'I want them,' and they are thine." The frightened face at the window looked from right to left, and from left to right. "Hush," said the girl, and laid her finger upon her lips. "Here. Thou hadst best get away from here, poor soul, as fast as thy legs can carry thee, for if the Lord Baron should find thee here, talking secretly at the postern door, he would loose the wolf-hounds upon thee." "Prut," said one-eyed Hans with a grin, "the Baron is too big a fly to see such a little gnat as I. But wolf-hounds, or no wolf-hounds, I can never go hence without showing thee the pretty things I have brought from the town, even though my stay be at the danger of my own hide." He flung the pack from his shoulders as he spoke, and fell to unstrapping it, while the round face of the lass, her eyes big with curiosity, peered down at him through the grated iron bars. Hans held up a necklace of blue and white beads that glistened like jewels in the sun, and from them hung a gorgeous filigree cross. "Didst thou ever see a sweeter thing than this?" he said. "And look here at the comb that even the silversmith should swear was pure silver all the way through." Then in a soft, wheedling voice, "Canst thou not let me in, my little bird? Sure there are other lasses besides myself who would like to trade with a poor peddler who has travelled all the way from Grunstadt just to please the pretty ones of Drutstrachen?" "Nay," said the lass in a frightened voice, "I cannot let thee in. I know not what the Baron would do to me, even now, if he knows that I was here talking to a stranger at the postern." And she made as if she would clap the little window in his face. But the one-eyed Hans thrust his staff betwixt the bars, and so kept the shutters open. "Nay, nay," he said eagerly, "be not go away from me too soon. Look, dear one, seest thou the necklace?" "Ay," she said, looking hungrily at it. "Then listen. If thou wouldst but let me into the castle, so that I may strike a trade, I will give it to thee for thine own without thy paying a barley-corn for it." The girl looked and hesitated, and then looked again. The temptation was too great. There was a noise of softly drawn bolts and bars, and the door was hesitatingly opened a little way, and in a twinkling the one-eyed Hans had slipped inside the castle, pack and all. "The necklace," said the girl in a frightened whisper. Hans thrust it into her hand. "It's thine," he said, "and now wilt thou not help me to a trade?" "I will tell my sister that thou art here," said she, and away she ran from the little stone hallway, carefully bolting and locking the further door behind her. The door that the girl had locked was the only one that connected the postern hall with the castle. The one-eyed Hans stood looking after her. "Thou fool," he muttered to himself, "to lock the door behind thee. What shall I do next? I should like to know. Here I am just as badly off as I was when I stood outside the walls. Thou hussy, if thou hadst but let me into the castle for only 2 minutes, I would have found somewhere to have hidden myself while thy back was turned. But what shall I do now?" He rested his pack upon the floor and stood looking about him. Built in the stone wall opposite him was a high, narrow fireplace without carvings of any sort, As Hans' one eye wandered around the bare stone space, his glance fell at last upon it, and there it rested. For a while he stood looking intently at it. Presently he began rubbing his hand over his bristling chin in a thoughtful, meditative manner. Finally he drew a deep breath, and giving himself a shake as though to arouse himself from his thoughts, and often listening to a moment or two to make sure that no one was nigh, he walked softly to the fireplace and, stooping, peered up the chimney. Above him yawned a black cavernous depth, inky with soot of years. Hans straightened himself, and tilting his leathern cap to one side, began scratching his bullet head. At last he drew a long breath. "Yes, good," he muttered to himself. "He who jumps into the river must and swim the best he can. It is a vile, dirty place to thrust oneself, but I am in for it now, and must make the best of a lame horse." He settled the cap more firmly upon his head, spat upon his hands, and once more, stooping in the fireplace, gave a leap, and up the chimney he went with a rattle of loose mortar and black trickle of soot. By and by footsteps sounded outside the door. There was a pause, a hurried whispering of women's voices, the twitter of a nervous laugh, and then the door was pushed softly open, and the girl to whom the one-eyed Hans had given the necklace of blue and white beads, with a filigree cross hanging from it, peeped uncertainly into the room. Behind her broad, heavy face were three others, equally homely and stolid. For a while all four stood there looking blankly into the room and round it. Nothing was there but the peddler's knapsack laying in the middle of the floor. The man was gone. The light of expectancy slowly faded out of the girl's face. In its place succeeded first bewilderment and then dull alarm. "But, dear heaven," she said, "where then has the peddler man gone?" A moment or two of silence followed her speech. Again there was a hushed and breathless pause. It was the lass who had let Hans in at the postern who next spoke. "Yes," said she, a voice trembling with fright at what she had done. "Yes, it must have been a spirit, for now I remember, he had but one eye." The four girls crossed themselves, and their eyes grew big and round with fright. Suddenly a shower of mortar came rattling down the chimney. "Ach!" cried the four, as with one voice. Bang! The door was clapped to one. Away they scurried like a flock of frightened rabbits. Then Jacob, the watchman, came that way an hour later, upon his evening round for the castle. He found a peddler's knapsack laying in the middle of the floor. He turned it over with his pike staff, and saw that it was full of beads and trinkets and ribbons. "How came this here?" said he, and then, without waiting for the answer which he did not expect, he flung it over his shoulder and marched away with it.